how working in finance helped made me realize the so-called experts is a term used to establish ethos, but speakers often may be discussing topics that an industry itself actually has no definitive inclusion, or even worse, strongly opposing views on. So, for example, in someone could come to me now or even in 10 years and say, this is a finance wizard or a titan who worked at the largest institutions. He was 18, had a star-studded college career as president of an investment club, and has been working in the industry's most coveted jobs for years. But there's still hundreds of subsectors within finance that I have no clue about. Many academic theories and hypotheses that I could not comment on, that there's many of those that I could not comment on. And frankly, the same goes for a manager of a $1 billion hedge fund when asked about why the market reacted in a certain way, or even academic financial theories that he just did not happen to come across previously, even if it is in the world of hedge funds or portfolio management, because no one can read everything. And I would be especially cautious of this in the scientific field. A scientist or chemist or doctor can give an educated guess, but honestly probably does not know much about a subject unless they have done specific labs or read at least two academic papers on a specific disease, medicine, or chemical technology. So, for the best evidence of this, look at the Great Financial Crisis, where structures in an investment bank have explained, or I can essentially, they make financial products like CLOs and CDOs and MBS securities that were traded. They had no idea about the underlying risk of the financial products that they literally created. Not to mention the insurance companies, asset managers, and hedge funds that were the ultimate buyer of these products. In The Big Short, you'll read how I think it was either the author or someone in the industry in The Big Short said how they believe that the only people who have read the term sheets and looked through all the details of these securities were probably the lawyers who made them, who obviously have no part in the financial system, as well as like people like Michael Burry, who actually did end up shorting the market. And Warren Buffett, who is regarded as the best fundamental investor of all time, would have saw Berkshire Hathaway's portfolio cut in half if it were not for government bailouts, right? So their returns would have been negative, like minus 50%, and eroded so many years of profits, and his overall performance, his CAGR for his lifetime would have been much worse, if not just for government bailouts. So he was investing in a lot of financial companies and didn't know the sort of risk that they had. And I could not imagine a better expert within an industry than Warren Buffett in investing in finance, especially within financial stocks. That's one of his go-to sectors that he understands. And the more time you spend in markets, the more you will see that these pros and insiders that the retail traders envy actually are very wrong very often. And it's just educated guessing. And if you are a skeptic and think that the entire financial industry was conspiring to keep these securities afloat for some delusional reason, like I've met people like that, you can just look at Wall Street Oasis for another example. These are tenured people in the financial industry making hundreds of thousands of dollars in finance at the most prestigious and competitive jobs in the world, and they disagree regularly on this site. We can look at one example here. I can share my screen for this one actually. This is Wall Street Oasis and a topic about private credit if it's the golden age, right? And private credit is essentially direct lending. So instead of a bank, it's just investment firms that raise capital and they'll do direct lending, but it's typically more high yield for more risky projects. But these financial professionals will structure in ways that, even though it's more risky investments, that they have, and therefore they can charge higher yield and get higher return, that they have things in place that protect them from the potential downside. And there's many people that disagree about this industry on here, right? And this is just like whether the industry is doing well or not. Everyone knows it's doing well now, but many disagree about the future because no one knows the future. We can look at this guy saying private equity was stuck this decade. Many people don't agree with that. But in terms of like disagreement of facts, people are even disagreeing on whether private equity is useful, right? If you go on CNBC and watch an expert and say, oh, private equity builds a lot of useful skills for the XYZ reasons, people think, okay, yeah, this is a good industry. Then there's people in the industry that literally think that it's not useful. And then others that are like, what, are you crazy? There's obvious tangible skills. And this isn't like a very extreme example because this is pretty broad and telling the future, right? But then this right here, private credit is kind of shitty, in my opinion. It performs well when private equity performs, but less well. And then people are just like, what? They're completely different products, debt versus equity, with different risk return profiles. And people saying this is a bad take. And if we look more, people are saying like, this doesn't make sense. It's only true if the private equity portfolio companies are defaulting and therefore triggering covenant or yeah, basically defaulting, which is not the case when PE performs bad. Sometimes valuations just go down, but they're still able to pay interest. So yeah, people are just like, oh, this is a very bad take. And no, this isn't necessarily the best example, but there's many examples like this. If you just browse the site long enough, you'll see people disagree on basically every thread. And it's not just about these macro things and predicting about how an asset class will perform, but even I've seen disagreements on economic theories and financial theories, and some of them are like, oh, this is the way things work. And then people will be like, no, that's just the way things work in academic theory. But in reality, I've seen personally many times where it's deviated from that, right? And then people are like, oh, well, that's just mispricing due to dumb people or whatever it may be. But either way, you'll see many people disagreeing. And these are very intelligent people, right? At the end of the day, the person who posted that it said their title, it said second year analyst in investment banking. So yeah, they're young, an analyst, but we can also assume that he or she is probably not an idiot and knows finance better than 99+% of the population. And another example, I saw that thread yesterday, but in this morning I was reading the book called Lords of Finance. In chapter 14, it talked about Herbert Hoover and his neighbor Adolph Miller, both having negative views of the stock market during the 1920s, the mid 1920s. And this was before Hoover was president, but he was still very successful and had ethos. He was Secretary of Commerce, graduated first class from Stanford, made a fortune promoting mining ventures across the globe. And he was also described as the only man who emerged from America's evacuation from Europe in World War I with an enhanced reputation. Somehow, though, he believed the stock market was in a bubble. Both of them did, because prices had risen so much, even though earnings had risen too. So it's obviously ridiculous. They also believed that the stock market absorbed capital from the economy, which is also false because whenever there's someone putting money into the market, there's a seller on the other side who just took their money out of the market. They also believed margin loans on stocks were more inflationary than normal loans, which the author says is also fallacious because inflationary consequences of credit have to do with the total amount the public borrow and very little to do with the purposes for which it does so. Now, this is even a topic where I read it and I think the author is actually missing something, right? This is a book with editors, etc., and obviously someone who knows much more about finance than me. But when I'm thinking about it, I think that the people who, when someone uses credit and puts it into the financial market system, I think that there's more credit expansion that occurs there than within other industries. Like if you're buying a house, a car, or a business. Of course, there's always that practice where you borrow money, you make a purchase, and then the person who basically sold a product takes that money, say, puts it into a bank, which is then lent out again and again and again, etc. Right? That's how things work. But I don't think all industries are made equal. And I think, and in my experience, the people that are investing capital in stock markets, they're very meticulous and anal that every dollar is put to use, financial leverage is optimized, etc. So I think that a seller of a car might be using that money just for everyday expenditures, right? Person who sells their house might use that cash to just buy a house, mostly equity, or maybe less financial leverage than was used for their first house that they just sold. Or if you're a business, once you don't want to be fully financially leveraged. But in the stock market, a lot of these people will be. They'll take as much leverage as they can get. And if say I borrow money, buy a stock, then the person who just sold me that stock will probably take that money and then use 5x leverage to buy another stock and so on and so on. So that's actually, they did say it has very little. So they didn't say it's no effect. And it is true that just the total amount of credit that's issued does have the greatest effects, right? I believe. But this is just an area where I disagree with the author, where I do think actually lending in the stock market will probably lead to more credit expansion and more borrowing than if that capital was put into another industry, which the more credit that's available does have an inflationary effect. Either way, inflation was very low at that time. There was nothing to worry about, but this is just a financial theory concept about where credit is used that when I first read it, I was like, I don't think that all applications of credit are created equal. So the takeaway from this is essentially just do your own research and don't blindly trust industry experts. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So make sure you hit the like and subscribe. I'll do more sort of videos along the lines of this about what I'm reading and when I see disagreements within the industry and also other useful tips in finance. Thanks, guys. Hey, guys, it's the following day, and in the book I'm reading, Lords of Finance, as I mentioned previously, I actually found another example of an expert getting things wrong. The head of the German central bank, Holmar Schacht, let me find the pronunciation, who was touted as the most intelligent man in the realm of finance in the entire country of Germany at the time, and also lauded by other heads of central banks from other countries as being exceptionally apt in economics and monetary policy, despite being egotistical and having other character flaws. They all say he's a very intelligent man. And he was also known as the man who rescued Germany from hyperinflation and stabilized the currency. But he still made a blatant error in terms of economics and monetary policy, like clear right or wrong, and he made the wrong decision. So the scenario is that Germany's economic recovery around 1926 drove over optimism, which led to foreign, especially American parties, to lending to state and local governments and municipalities in Germany. So the country of Germany quickly became overlevered actually and went back into a deficit. And as the central bank had no control over what the state and local government's decisions, there's little that they could do. So shocked, he didn't want to perform credit tightening as raising domestic interest rates would only cause people to further turn to foreign borrowing. So he thought maybe if he weakened just the general funding environment and investor sentiment, it may dampen this lending and over exuberance of credit and people just borrowing and borrowing and over optimism. So subsequently, he made an overnight rule that made banks reduce their stock-based lending by 25%. So overnight. And stock prices plummeted 10% in one day and recorded a 20% drop over the following months in Germany. However, the municipalities that were doing the borrowing aren't affected by the stock market, so they just continued borrowing from abroad. All that Shocks achieved was unnecessary damage to business confidence, just weakened the economy without reducing the amount of borrowing that was occurring. Just another example of a time where you can have someone who's one of the smartest people in economics and finance and monetary policy at the time, and they execute something where they have a plan of the economic effect and they have an economic theory, and it's just completely wrong. It just has a negative effect on the economy and didn't achieve what he had planned. But yeah, just another example that even someone could be seen as the best expert in the country, one of the best in the world at the time, and they could still just have blatantly wrong economic theories.